Hey everyone, we're back with another episode of How to Get My Job. We sit down with amazing people within the design and product industry and ask them how their careers started, evolved, and what advice they have for those coming after them. Joining us today is Karen Manhas, a UX designer at Warner Brothers Discovery. Hey Karen, how you doing?
Good to be here. Thank you for having me, Danielle.
No, it's my pleasure. Loving the energy, by the way. So yeah, your career is really interesting. You've worked at some amazing companies, and I would just love to dive into that a little bit and learn about how you got to where you are today. So let's jump into it with the first question. How did you get your first job in UX design?
This is such an interesting question because technically I got my first opportunity during my technology graduate program. So during my final year, I said to my manager that I wanted to explore UX design more. Is there any opportunity internally that I can work on some projects that need a UX designer? And luckily, there were one or two projects that needed me. And it was such a steep learning curve because I wasn't a junior, it wasn't a junior role. So I just got thrown in the deep end. And I didn't really have anyone that I could bounce ideas off other than the business analyst I was working with at the time. So that's how I got my first role. In terms of my first full-time UX design job, that was at GlaxoSmithKline. And that was at the height of the pandemic. So I started applying probably around March, April 2020. And then I just applied and applied on LinkedIn, Indeed, and did my CV and really put onto my CV all of the skills that I had learned from my graduate scheme. So after I was applying,
Yeah.
I had three interviews and it wasn't traditional because I didn't do a portfolio review. They rarely asked me design questions, but it was for a product designer role, which I don't think any company will do now. So it wasn't an exception. But having said that, it was the first and only company where I had a virtual onboarding, never went into the office, never met my colleagues. And yeah, it was a really bizarre experience at the time, but that's how I got my first role and I guess my first full-time UX design position.
Interesting. I guess, yeah, now that you've been working as a UX designer for a while, what would you say are the most important qualities a UX designer could have?
There are three key qualities that come to my mind. The first one is problem solving. With problem solving, it's about breaking down big problems into smaller, digestible chunks. With problem solving, it's about critical thinking, thinking outside the box, thinking about platforms, thinking about systems, really problem solving, I guess, and how you go about doing that. The second skill I would say is listening. This is such an underrated skill, especially active listening. So for me, it's about listening to understand, listening to avoid misinterpretation, listening to avoid conflict. And that leads me into my third one, which I guess is an extension, which is communication. Like as a UX designer, I am persuading, I am influencing, I am informing, I am explaining my design decisions. So listening, communication, and problem solving are the key skills, I would say.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I couldn't agree more. I really liked what you said about the importance of listening. But yeah, those are definitely key qualities to have. And I guess, yeah, now that you've worked at quite a few different companies, I'm sure you've had loads of different interactions with different people and potentially mentors along the way. What's the best career advice you've ever been given?
But there's two that stand out so far. So the first one is always see the bigger picture. And what is the bigger picture? So for me, it's about open opportunities because I want to see where they take me. Like that's the bigger picture. And the second one I would say is always keep going. That doesn't apply to everyone, but it has worked for me quite well. And what I mean by that is when it was told to me, I thought, isn't that obvious? Like you just keep moving. But I realized it isn't, because like if I think about studying engineering for a really long time, I know that some of my uh, fellow graduates in my cohort, they were happy, for example, to graduate without a job. And for me, like that wasn't an option. So it was like I had to keep going, I had to keep applying, I had to go to assessment centers. And then when I got into my grad scheme, it was like, okay, the pandemic's hit, but I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket, applying internally. I want to try externally. Again, like keep going. And then at GSK, when my role started to change, it was like, okay, if I stay, what's the bigger picture? What do I want to do? What do I want to achieve? Okay, like keep going. Let's apply for the next job. And so it's about keeping moving. I also acknowledge that doesn't work for everyone, but it has really worked for me really well. So what's the bigger picture, and to always keep going.
I love that. And yeah, like you said, I think you made a good point there where you said, look, that looks different for everyone. It's a really important message. Last and final question. What podcast, series, or book are you loving right now?
There is a podcast called the Product Design Podcast by Seth. I want to say Colin. He is, I want to say, a founder or co-founder of UX Cabin, which is a product design research agency. And on his podcast, he talks to many different people from many different backgrounds with non-traditional experience. He speaks to people who have founded their own companies, who have YouTube channels, who have done an apprenticeship. And it's such a interesting and detailed podcast about just how people got to where they are in their career. Yeah, I would just 100% recommend the podcast.
Love that. Yeah. Well, I'm sure people listening to this who are interested in getting into product design who are product designers already would love to listen to that. So thank you so much for that recommendation. And that brings us to the end. Thank you so much, Karen, for being a guest on the show.
Happy to be here. Also, don't mind me sitting on the floor. Everyone always talks about this.
Well, it's clearly helped with the podcast because you came across really well, super eloquent, articulate, delivered your points excellently. So yeah, thank you so much. And until next time, bye for now.